Hello, everyone. I'll crack on with execution today. We are inside the mansion on the island where Alfred Furness lives. Alfred Furness is a husk of a man inside a machine. And when Alex looks at him, he sees the man, the old man, impossibly old. And he also sees a young boy with his face kind of flickering over the top. But he also sees on top of that the stranger from the orchard, this impossible creature who fed Furness's blood. The three of them existing together on try to make that a bit cleaner. That looks a bit spooky. The three of them are kind of existing together in this machine. Alex's friend Z and Simon and Lucy are outside the mansion. Colonel Alice I can't talk really well today. Colonel Alice Panettiere is on the island now with a load of troops. There's a load of berserkers on the island as well. There's basically about to be an all-out war on this island. And Alex knows that the only way he can save his friends and himself is by taking control of the berserkers on the island and essentially making them fight. Furness has decided he's not going to control them anymore. He's leaving them to be slaughtered. But it's all a ruse to get Alex to say yes. To get Alex to basically take his place in the machine as Lord and Commander of everything in Furness's army. Everything with nectar in its veins. Alex has literally just said, okay, I'll take your place. And this is what happens next. Okay, life. The moment I made contact with the machine, it seemed to know what to do. The pulse inside it grew in pace and in volume, vibrating so much that it made my bones rattle. Two figures walked through the chamber door, the maskless Weezers, their corpse grins so wide that it looked as though somebody had sliced them open from ear to ear. They staggered towards me, the needles around their chest clinking, and the sight of them made me feel like I was back inside the prison, watching the Blood Watch stalk the cells. I panicked, every muscle in my body tensing, my lungs unable to draw air. What the hell was I doing? "Do not be afraid," said Furness, and his voice, half whisper, half thunder, was impossible to disobey. It chased the fear away. "They will not hurt you." He was right. The Weezers were gentle, and they were kind. One slotted my hands into the straps before buckling my legs in place. The other held my head tenderly in its creased, leathery hands, pulling the cradle down over my scalp and fastening it under my chin. They worked together to clip a massive belt around my chest, leaving it loose enough for me to be able to breathe. When they stood back, their bodies spasming, their fat black tongues thrashing in the wet pools of their mouths, I was held fast, but there was no pain. "When I was turned, all I had to do was drink," Furness said. I remembered the vision, the boy who'd been nailed to the tree, drinking the blood of the stranger. "But we are a more civilized people now. We trust in science as well as magic." I angled my head so that I could see him, both of us strapped side by side like we were on the fields of Golgotha. His head swiveled around, those three faces still fighting for superiority, their movement so fast now that it made my head hurt to look at them. I didn't turn away, though. "Begin," said Furness. The Weezers separated, walking to the sides of the machine where they busied themselves with wheels and levers. I didn't care. The method of what was happening wasn't important, only the result. Something slid from the framework around me, half a dozen needles connected to plastic tubing. They sank deep into the flesh of my upper arm, but there was still no pain, only a slight discomfort. With a stomach-turning noise, 3 of the needles began to pump, and I watched as the red-flecked nectar was sucked out of my body. "That nectar, the new nectar, is the most powerful we have ever managed to create," Furness explained as he watched the flow. "But even its power dims in comparison to the blood. We must drain you of it before I pass on my gift." I could feel my body growing weaker as the nectar flowed out of it, the same way it had back in the hospital. Unlike then, though, I was about to be given something far better, something that would turn me into a being of unthinkable power. "A being," Furness said, once again reading my thoughts. "You will become nothing less than a god." I looked at the figure beside me, a boy who should have died hundreds of years ago, a man who built an empire and who lived to see it change the world, and a creature that was older than time. I smiled, knowing that I too would experience the same gift. The smile was short-lived. The chamber was growing dark as the last drops of nectar were cleansed from my body. A sense of dread began to rise in me, like I was sinking into cold water. Without the nectar, I would die. Was this just another of Furness's cruel tricks to lure me to my death with the promise of eternal life? There was another noise, the gurgle of a straw in an empty cup, the red-flecked fluid in the tubes disappearing. My vision had now faded completely, and my hearing was following fast. Furness said something to me, but his words were no more than an incomprehensible noise, as if my ears were stuffed with cotton wool. Then, for what felt like an eternity, there was nothing. Distantly, I sensed the machine change pitch, its growling pulse softening. Immediately my body began to burn, an onslaught of fire and ice in every single cell of my being. Even the rush of the nectar was nothing compared to this. It was as if the very fabric of the universe was a plaything that I could use or destroy any way I wished. I was instantly alert, more alive than I'd ever been. My eyes snapped open and I saw that the other 3 tubes had turned black as the stranger's blood was pumped from Furness into me. I heard myself laugh, and that laughter was as loud as Furness's had once been, an explosion that rocked the chamber and flooded into the world beyond, to be felt in the soul of every living thing on earth. The thought of it made me cry out with joy. I felt my mutated body slough away, felt myself rise up out of my scarred and twisted flesh, felt the fear and the anger wash out of me, knowing that I would never again be punished by the weakest of human emotions. I kept on cackling like a lunatic, even though some last part of me, of the boy I'd once been, realised the horror of what was happening. There was almost enough of him left to make sense of the nightmare that was unfolding, to know that of all the fates I could have prayed for, this was by far the worst. But that part of me was almost completely lost now. A lone voice whispering in the middle of a hurricane. And then it was gone. There was only the stranger's blood. "Why me?" I asked again, each word a sonic boom. "It is because you are here," Furness said, his voice muted, more human. I saw his body begin to fall apart as the blood left him, his skin cracking into dust, his bones breaking, his limbs folding into crooked spirals. The figure of the stranger was fading, and I knew why. It was leaving Furness, deserting its old host. It was moving into me. For a second, there were only the 2 human faces. Then, in the blink of an eye, the boy's alone remained. He inhaled as if it was the first breath he'd ever taken, and his pale eyes were filled with sorrow. But whether it was for me or for himself, I couldn't tell. "It is because you remembered," he said. Then, with an almighty crack, his head crumbled into itself, his face breaking into 100 pieces, drifting to the stone like snow and ash. And with his final words, I saw the rest of his story, his memories now mine, flooding into me with the last few drops of blood. In that second, I lived an entire life, Alfred Furness's life. I was back in the orchard, feeling what the young Furness felt as he drank the blood of the stranger, filled with a power he was barely old enough to comprehend. I charged with him through the trees, back towards his village, with the mind of an animal and the strength of a god. That cloud of dark energy surrounded him, the stranger somehow superimposed over Furness's body, looking like he was hemorrhaging black mist into the air. He tore through his own people with such ferocity that I could feel the bile rise in my throat. His viciousness left nothing behind but an island of severed limbs in an ocean of blood. It was only when he finally found the corpse of his brother, Joseph, that he seemed to emerge from his bloodlust. I watched him drop down onto his knees beside the boy. I felt his horror, his shock, as he realised that his veins now ran with the blood of his sibling's murderer. He reached out, cradling the dead body, rocking back and forth and howling so loud that his breath threatened to extinguish the fires that had started in the village. "It does not want anger," I heard Furness's voice in my head, the boy's voice, as if he were here too, watching a replay of his life. "It is not enough for it to possess a mindless creature bent on destruction. It needs somebody who can remember, somebody who will never forget the child they once were. It needs you to be able to keep control." "I don't understand," I said. "The moment I saw Joseph, I remembered," Furness said. "I remembered who I was. Joseph would never have wanted me to be like this. It was the memory of him that stopped me from becoming a berserker, or worse. The stranger's blood gave me power, but it was the memories of Joseph, of my old life, that let me control it for so long, and to make it even stronger over the centuries. You are the same, are you not?" "What do you mean?" I said. Furness's lifeline sped up, so fast I could barely follow it. I saw him hiding out in a forest, years spent by himself as he tried to understand what was happening to him. I saw him spurned and cast out by the people he encountered, the men and women who attacked him without question, sensing the evil inside him. Then the armies who declared war on what they saw as a devil. The battle I had seen before in my dreams was but one of many, I realised. Tens of thousands had tried to kill Furness, and they'd all paid with their lives. I saw the barn, the boy who was being kicked to death by the posse of howling adults. I watched again as Furness shared his blood with the kid, the boy taking his revenge on his attackers. This was the first of Furness's children. Those few droplets from his master's vein multiplied the boy's strength 100-fold. I watched as, only 2 days later, the same kid died, the undiluted poison wreaking havoc on his flesh. "Most people cannot handle the blood," Furness said. "It's too much for them. It breaks them. I survived because it was not just some of the stranger's blood inside me, but all of it, the stranger himself dwelling in my body, in my mind. And it was because I remembered my life, my name, because I'd kept my mind that he could use me. You, like me, still remember. That is what it wants, Alex, because if the host remembers nothing of the world it came from, it is no more use to the stranger than a dog." More flash forwards. Furness, older now, trying to find a way to share his blood with other children without killing them. I saw countless victims become rats. Furness commanded them as his personal army, their deformed bodies hidden beneath chainmail and armour, unstoppable in battle, but never living much more than a week. A few survived, still growing, starting to change into berserkers, but even these would eventually fall apart before the process could complete, their bodies swelling uncontrollably until they simply burst. Decades passed, Furness growing richer as he conquered his enemies, reducing entire cities to dust. Then the scene changed, and I was in an old-fashioned laboratory, watching a bearded man working with beakers full of black blood. The stranger was still there, part of Furness, his featureless face smiling and yet not smiling, watching intently as the man worked. "It was in Vienna, more than a century ago, that I created the nectar," Furness said. "I found a way to dilute the blood, to replicate its effects without causing certain death." I watched as the man in my vision pricked his finger with a needle, a tiny bead of blood dropping into a container of clear liquid. Instantly the fluid began to cloud, until it looked like a vat of oil filled with tiny golden flecks. I recognised it, the nectar that the warden and his wheezers had used back inside the prison. He filled a syringe from the container and injected it into a child. The kid, the guinea pig, bucked and thrashed as the poison entered his veins. but he remained human. Days passed, the boy growing stronger, bigger. When his expanding body threatened to split his skin, Furness performed surgery, patching him up with grafts and muscles salvaged from a fresh corpse until, maybe a week later, I recognised him as a black suit, a soldier of Furness. "This was the first time I managed to harness the nectar's power successfully," I heard Furness say. "My soldiers were young, yes, and fast, able to heal themselves of most injuries, but they only had the nectar. They only had a fraction of the power of the stranger's blood. Any more, and they would simply become monsters. They would lose their minds. They were good soldiers, yes, but none could become my heir. The blood would kill them." Another gut-churning leap forwards in time. Furness, much older now, his face so gaunt beneath his beard that he could have been a walking corpse. He was standing inside a bunker, surrounded by young men, teenagers. They were all dressed in long black coats, red swastikas emblazoned on their armbands, a bandolier of needles strapped to their chests, gas masks concealing their faces. I could see their eyes, though, as black as coal. Whoever these men were, they had consumed the nectar, and it had already kept them alive for far longer than they deserved. "As my experiments progressed, I found that some were immune to the nectar," he said, "or nearly so. Their new blood processed the atmosphere differently, the air they breathed setting off a chemical reaction that proved fatal. Many died before I discovered the cause and the solution, to filter out nearly all of the oxygen using modified gas masks. I made them my scientists. They grew old with me, so old, forgetting everything but the desire to experiment, to create. I have heard you call them wheezers. Your friend Z would make a suitable candidate." The room was full of cages, and I realised that I had been here before, in my dreams back inside the prison. Kids crouched in the shadows inside each container, their sad eyes fixed on the men around them and on the pile of corpses in the corner. "The problem was that I only had a limited supply of blood inside me, so we could only make a small quantity of nectar. 1 or 2 soldiers a week. We almost developed a new nectar under Hitler, but he failed before we could finish. Hitler wanted to use it on himself, but of course it would have killed him. He was too old. Besides, he was a weak man, Alex, far weaker than you." Another scene I recognised. Gas-masked men struggling through the mud carrying a stretcher, looking for the wounded, the nearly dead. I saw them carry off dozens of men, all of them screaming to be let back onto the battlefield, crying out to die. I saw Furness himself pulling a teenage boy from the blood and filth. I recognised the warden. "He was to be my heir," he said, and I saw them working together, Furness feeding Cross nectar until the warden's eyes became a mirror image of his own twin vortexes. "He drank of the nectar, consumed more of it than I believed possible, and yet he still remembered who he was, who he had been, and where he had come from. I knew that one day I would pass my gift, my blood, to him." More images, changing too fast to make sense of, time peeling away. I saw the construction of the tower in the city, then the prison being built, its purpose to create an endless supply of test subjects. The warden inside continuing the same experiments, all under his master's supervision. By now, Furness was trapped here on the island, fixed into his infernal machine, his body wasted, decayed, but his mind as sharp as ever. I witnessed him and his wheezers creating the new breed of nectar, the one that could pass from mortal to mortal with just a bite, the one with the power to create the berserkers outside, the leviathans in the water. But alas, Cross disappointed me. He could not keep his house in order. Where one failed, however, another succeeded. I found somebody else, somebody more deserving, somebody who, like Cross, had consumed far more nectar than I thought possible, and yet who still remembered who he was. I saw myself, the boy I had once been, so human he was almost unrecognisable. The day I travelled down to Furness in the elevator, I saw those doors opening to reveal the hell where I thought I would spend the rest of my life. The place in which I thought I would die. Donovan was there, leading me up the stairs, scowling. Then, inside my cell, when his face had opened up and suddenly the prison hadn't seemed so dark, so far underground. I saw it all, everything that happened, our attempts to escape, the day we made it back onto the streets, my fight with the warden in the tower, everything right up to this one ageless, endless second.
"We are the same, you and I," said Furness. "We were both accused of a murder we didn't commit. We were both sentenced to death for that crime, and we were both given a chance to right that wrong, to take revenge on the world that had condemned us. It was necessary for your friend Toby to die so that you might share those emotions with me. It is these similarities that led us to each other. Given a choice, of course, I would never hand over the gift, but I do not know how much longer I have. It may be another 100 years, it may be another hour, and if I die without passing on the blood, then everything will have been for nothing."
I had a vision of myself as I was right now, strapped to the machine, the stranger's blood pumping through me. My entire body seemed to radiate darkness, waves of absence ebbing from my pores. And my eyes were vast portals, black holes of infinite nothingness. I wasn't scared, though. I wasn't excited either. There were no emotions, only the feeling that this was right, that I belonged. Another kid had been here, Alfred Furness, a good kid, an innocent kid, and I was to replace him. Nothing in my life had ever seemed more logical or made more sense.
"I wanted to make a world where there is no more weakness," Furness said. "I still do. A world where a boy like me can never be nailed to a tree and slaughtered, where a boy like you can fight back against all those who attack him. A place where there is only strength, where all are equal, where all fight on the same side. Do that for me, Alex. Finish this."
The boy I had once been, the boy Furness had once been, would both have seen the twisted logic of that argument for what it was, would have understood that what really drove Furness was the stranger in his veins, a creature of evil that wanted only to wreak destruction upon humanity, to turn life to rot. But the stranger's blood was too powerful, its cry for power too loud, and that understanding was obliterated from my mind. "I will," I said. "I promise." And even as I made one promise, I honoured another. I could sense Alfred Furness hanging on somewhere inside me, a trace of him left in the blood he'd just given me. Just a boy, terrified of the end, of what might come next. Then I felt him leave, my body shuddering as the last of his consciousness fled. I had seen his whole life, centuries of it, flash by in an instant, and it ended just as quickly. Furness was dead. I had killed him, and I had taken his place. Oh, Alex. Hang on, I'll do one more chapter, but I'll better just make some room on the old computer. It's 'cause these movie files take up so much space. If it'll let me do it, that is. It might not. Oh, sorry, nothing's easy, is it? Move to trash. Moving myself to the trash. That's really sad. There we go. Bye bye, old me. And now we've got room for more me. Me. Okay. The gift. Furness was gone, leaving me alone with the creature from the orchard. I could feel him there, like a weight inside my head, his blood in my veins like puppet strings, as though he could make me do anything he wanted. Furness had argued against injustice, but the stranger did not care about right or wrong. He told me so without words. All he wanted was to watch the world burn.
"And you will too," he said.
I concentrated on the power of the stranger's blood. It surged inside me, setting every nerve ending alight, making me feel like I could snap my fingers and stop time, cut the stars from the heavens. I was still strapped to the machine inside the chamber. I knew that much, but I was also in countless other places. I could see 1,000 different sights, smell so many different scents, could hear all the world at once and make sense of everything. I knew what was happening. I was inside the head of every single being with nectar in its veins, from the Weezers who stood in this very room to the black suits who waged war on the mainland, from the berserkers on the island above me to the leviathans in the ocean, even the rats, so many of them. I could sense Simon there too, his fear, his hysteria as the army continued their attack. This was the true gift, I realised. I couldn't just see these things, the black suits, the berserkers, the Weezers. I was them. The stranger's blood, my blood, now flowed inside them. They were mine to do with as I pleased. "It's okay," I said, directing the message to Simon. I could feel the shift in his emotions when he heard me. First disbelief, then hope breaking through the despair like a starburst. He replied, but I'd already moved on. I could see the island from dozens of different viewpoints at once, the effect dizzying, like looking into a kaleidoscope. The soldiers had broken out of the trees, still mowing down the motionless berserkers with their weapons. I felt those bullets as if it was me who was being shot, the sudden flash of pain cutting through the numbness inside my mind, filling me with rage. They would pay for that. I ordered the berserkers to attack, feeling the nectar begin to pound in their hearts, their thoughts turning to murder as their paralysis was broken. I followed one, watching from inside its head as it bounded over the fractured rock towards two Marines in camouflage. They saw it coming, firing their weapons, but it was too late. I could feel its strength as it lashed out, its claws spearing one of the soldiers through his torso, wrapping its jaws around the other man's arm, the sensation making me feel like I was crunching ice cubes. At the same time, I directed 6 more berserkers towards the tree line, seeing through all their eyes at once, feeling as though their feet were my own as they stampeded. One fell, caught by a mortar blast, the sudden darkness of its vision, the gaping emptiness of its thoughts, throwing me for a second. But the others made up for their fallen brother, laying into their enemies with a ferocity that made the ground tremble. The soldiers were panicking at this sudden onslaught, falling back, their faces warped by fear. I scanned the retreating crowds, looking for Panettiere, but I couldn't see her anywhere. It didn't matter. She could wait. There was no place for her to hide. Not now. A jet roared overhead, and suddenly the island turned to flame as its missile struck, the effect like a volcano erupting. The inferno blazed over the rock between the trees and the mansion, eradicating everything that stood there. I heard the berserkers scream inside my head, their voices those of the children they'd once been. I could feel the heat, its touch unbearable. "Don't be afraid," I commanded, trying to wipe the fear from their minds, trying to absorb the pain as the life ebbed from them. I talked to them as they died, telling them that they were going to a good place, that they would be safe there and free. I don't think they understood my words, but I could feel their relief at the sound of my voice, sensing that they weren't alone and that there was something better than this. I experienced their agony as if it was my own, but I accepted it, knowing that even though it felt as if I was dying over and over and over again, I was safe inside the chamber. I retaliated instantly, commanding the rest of the berserkers into the trees, telling them to show no mercy. Blood flew, limbs lopped off like felled branches, skulls broken, chests and stomachs pierced, throats chewed out. It was a sight from the very inner circle of hell, one that would have driven a mortal insane. But I was no longer mortal. I heard myself laugh grimly as I watched the carnage, the sound silent and yet deafening, those impossible howls a perfect soundtrack to the madness. Some of the soldiers had bolted, tripping down the steps back towards the dock. There were boats there, rising and falling in the tide, filling fast, but they wouldn't provide a safe haven. I entered the head of a leviathan, feeling the cold water flow against its skin as it dived and somersaulted below the waves. It welcomed me with joy, relishing the chance to attack, and I watched through its dark eyes as it surged upwards, gaining speed, ramming the boat so hard that it cracked the hull with its skull. I saw the bodies falling overboard like I was watching from the bottom of a swimming pool, their thrashing forms silhouetted against the sky, their screams muted by the water. It all seemed to be happening in slow motion. The Leviathan unfurled its spider-like arms, wrapping them around the flailing figures, pulling them into the depths where they would spend all of eternity. More troops were moving in, 2 Chinook helicopters dropping towards the mansion on the mansion side of the island, an Apache alongside them, its cannons tearing up anything that moved. I was running out of berserkers, the army's firepower just too much. I remembered the big one. The one we'd encountered in the forest. It was still stationed by the front door, and I told it to attack. I watched through its eyes as it rammed towards where the helicopters were landing, bullets thudding into its flesh, no more painful than mosquito bites. One of the choppers saw it coming, tried to take off, but the berserker was too quick. It threw itself at the open loading ramp as it left the ground, the soldiers there still fighting to free their weapons. In seconds, it had slaughtered them all, squeezing through to the cockpit, leaving it looking like a butcher's shop. The chopper spun, dropping like a stone, the berserker leaping out moments before the Chinook vanished over the edge. The beast didn't even pause for breath, bounding towards the second helicopter as a plume of fire rose up behind it, the explosion causing a section of the cliff to crumble loose. It didn't make it far. A missile from the Apache reducing it to chunks of wet flesh. I called out to it, remembering the way it had nuzzled against my hand, just a child desperate for contact. But there was no response. All it was now was a gaping absence in my head. There was another bone-jarring eruption of fire as a jet screamed overhead, but this time the airstrike missed its target. If anything, it seemed to confuse the army, the troops splitting up in all directions, trying to find cover in the superheated smoke. Picking them off was easy, like shooting fish in a barrel. Chaos gripped the island in a fist of fear and flame. Through every set of eyes I saw death and murder, claws and bullets flying. One of the berserkers took a round in its eye, dying instantly. Another saw what had happened, and I could feel its pain and its fury at the loss of one of its brothers. I didn't need to tell it what to do. It sought instant revenge, dashing the murderous soldier against the rock. Things were no better in the water, 4 more leviathans joining the first. They had scuppered most of the smaller boats, and I ordered them to attack the ships. They looked like vast, spindly crabs as they scaled the side of the battle cruisers, ripping the soldiers from the decks. The ocean around the island churned red. Some of the boats were turning, heading back to the mainland, but I was determined to make sure that none of them made it, directing my soldiers after them. And all the while, I could feel the stranger whose blood flowed in my veins, the one who'd made all of this possible. He didn't speak, didn't make a sound, and yet I could sense his rancid glee in every fibre of my body. He was delighted with me, his new host. Never had I felt such malevolent joy, such cruel, sadistic happiness. I was distracted by Simon's thoughts, and I observed through his eyes as he, Z and Lucy ran through the unguarded front door of the mansion. "I'm downstairs," I said, showing Simon a mental image of the chamber. "It's safe here." I heard him repeat the message to the others, his voice sounding strange as it echoed inside his own head. He led the way across the hall and down the corridor. Both Z and Lucy were bombarding him with questions, but I didn't stop to listen, returning my attention to my troops as the island came under yet another assault. The second Chinook had managed to land, masked soldiers pouring out into the smoke. Half set up suppressing fire, a wave of bullets cut down another 2 berserkers. The rest used the cover to clamber into the house, some through the door and others throwing themselves at the windows. Once they'd set up a position, they started shooting out across the island, allowing the rest of the soldiers to enter. It was impossible to identify the men and women behind the masks, but somehow I knew she was one of them. Panettiere. I felt my pulse quicken, pumping the stranger's blood around my system, the noise so loud that it was as if the very earth had a heartbeat. I called on the remaining berserkers, telling them to return to the mansion to find her. There were still 2 berserkers here in the chamber, and I ordered them to intercept her. Panettiere and her army would be pinned between 2 unstoppable waves. The creatures bounded past me, giving me a glimpse of myself, a demon crucified to a machine. In seconds they'd reached the top of the steps and were running down the corridor on all 4s. There was a weird moment when they passed Simon. The same event seemed from 2 different angles. My friends fell back against the wall, Lucy knocking a painting loose, but of course the berserkers weren't interested in them and kept running. I saw what happened next. Through 6 sets of eyes, 3 creatures from outside leaping through the windows onto the soldiers. A 4th tried to get in through the door, but somebody had rigged up an explosive, the blast sending it flying back out, dead before it hit the rock. Even so, what followed next was a massacre. The 5 surviving berserkers attacking from all angles, giving the army no chance. The soldiers didn't know which way to turn, some of them firing in wild circles, killing their own friends. They scattered, a few vanishing through doors or throwing themselves back outside. Most were too slow, though, screaming for mercy. They received none. "Nobody survives," I told the berserkers, relishing their excitement. They were an extension of my own body, and when they tasted blood, so did I, the warmth gushing down my throat. When they lashed out with their monstrous limbs, my own arms twitched, my new fingers gouging at the air, my blade slicing. Never had I felt power like this. I truly was a god. My delight echoed that of the stranger, our strength unmatched, unsurpassable. There were only a handful of men and women left, both inside and outside the mansion. All but a couple of the boats had been destroyed as well, the rest already out of sight over the horizon. There were still helicopters in the air, the jet a gleaming sliver of light in the distance, but other than that, the only evidence that the army had been here were the corpses that carpeted the smoking ground. I watched as the berserkers inside the house chased down the last few survivors, killing them in ways that I never could have imagined possible. I saw one approach a woman. My heart drummed, thinking it was Panettiere, but when she pulled off her gas mask in an act of defiance, I saw it wasn't. This was a girl, barely older than Lucy, her features grey with terror. The berserkers moved in for the kill, but I held them back, my bloodlust fading. This soldier wasn't Panettiere. She wasn't evil. She was just following orders. Her eyes were so wide that the white seemed like glowing rings, the pupils dilated by terror. They flicked between the berserkers as they surrounded her, but each time it seemed as though she was staring right at me. "Go to hell," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "All of you." Too late, I realised she was holding a satchel in one hand, the other reaching inside. I drove the berserkers forward, but even these Goliaths of muscle and nectar couldn't get to the girl fast enough. She closed her eyes and flicked a switch, the C4 detonating loud enough to rain dust down on me from the ceiling of the chamber. The senses of those creatures were ripped away from my own so fast that it felt as if part of my soul had been torn out. The darkness that flooded into the vacuum where those living, breathing things had been was so overpowering that I thought for an instant I'd gone blind and deaf, my entire body numb. Gradually, however, the light and the noise crept back. I let my mind fly out to find the remaining berserkers. There were only 3 of them left on the whole island, 2 of them fatally wounded. I did my best to mute their pain, but their bodies were broken beyond repair, and they seemed to know it. I felt my anger grow, seeming to make the new blood inside me boil. It wasn't right that the berserkers had to die. They were just children. Panettiere would pay for this. They would all pay for this. I cast my mind out wider, over the ocean to the mainland. There were a small number of black suits left on the coast, the seaside town where we'd caught the boat, and they were fighting with more soldiers. I sensed berserkers nearby, directing them to the battle, unleashing them on the men and women in camouflage. I could feel them all, thousands of berserkers and black suits across the country, each of them unique, each of them mine to control. I could even get inside the minds of the rats, although there was so little there, nothing but a tornado of violence that shook them to their core, that all I could do was point them in the right direction. I sent out a message, a clarion call to arms, and I heard their answer, a battle cry that rose up from every last one of my soldiers. They would never stop fighting, and neither would I. I had made a promise to Furness. I would see his creations win this war, eradicate every inferior being so that we could start again, so that we could create a world of equals, a world populated only by the children of the nectar. A world where the wickedness of human nature would be no more. It would be our planet, for us alone, a fatherland for the soldiers of Furness. it would be a paradise. Wow. Alex. He's losing it. I hope he can find his way back. We will find out in the next installment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's only 6 chapters left, and the epilogue. Wow, definitely finished it this week. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the literally dozens of deaths in that chapter. Probably one of the most bloodthirsty chapters we've had in the whole series, I should think. Yeah, I hope you'll join me again next time. Hopefully tomorrow. I can make no promises, but hopefully tomorrow, where we will crack on with it. 6 chapters left. Maybe I'll read 2 tomorrow and try and get 4 done on Wednesday. I'll have to see how the day goes, and maybe they will save the epilogue. I don't know. We'll see. If I get, I won't make any promises. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and yeah, I hope you have a really lovely day, whatever you're doing, and I will see you very soon. Bye.